listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the US is proposing major changes to its visa exemption program. From 5 years of social media history to biometric data and personal family information, we break down what these changes mean for your privacy, your rights at the border, and the future of travel. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 11th of December. Former pilot Greg Lynn will face a new trial over the death of Victorian camper Carol Clay after his murder conviction was overturned. 59-year-old Lynn was found guilty of murdering the 73-year-old in the state's high country in 2020, but was acquitted of the murder of her camping companion, Russell Hill. Greg Lynn appealed the 2024 murder conviction and his 32-year prison sentence. Today, the Court of Appeal granted the appeal, with the President, Karen Emerton, saying, quote, there were a number of serious irregularities in the court of the trial, causing the substantial miscarriage of justice. Lynn has been remanded in custody. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has fired back as pressure grows over parliamentary travel entitlements. The PM insisting the rules are long established and haven't been changed by his government. Mr Albanese again dodging questions about an overhaul of the current rules or cracking down on the entitlement system.
I haven't changed the rule.
But you could.
I haven't changed the rule.
But you could.
I'm not the finance minister. I haven't changed the rule.
He says travel and family reunion allowances are designed to let MPs stay connected with their partners and that the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority operates at arm's length from government. And a zombie-proof electric car ad has topped Australia's most complained about advertisements for 2025. Ad Standards received almost 5,000 complaints this year, with 252 ads investigated and 79 found in breach of the code. Kia's zombie-proof EV campaign saw the most backlash, with 86 complaints, mostly from parents who said the imagery was frightening. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the tough new rules and restrictions travellers will face when they enter the US. While they're only proposed changes at this stage, Australians will be targeted in the new crackdown that will force travellers to hand over social media details, private phone numbers and email addresses from up to 10 years ago. Joining us is immigration lawyer Melissa Vincenty, who explains the proposed changes and why handing over more of our private information, especially when AI is used, is incredibly concerning. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start from the beginning. What are the new changes that are being proposed by the US administration?
So the changes that are being proposed are as an addition to changes that are already in place for visa holders or visa people who are actually applying for a visa. So the new changes or the new proposal applies to anyone who wants to apply for a visa waiver, which is what most Australians travel to the US on. So I think sometimes people are a little confused because they think an ESTA registration, which is what the common colloquial name of that is an actual visa, and it's not. It's actually just permission to enter the U.S. without a visa. And so changes that we've already seen, these changes are already happening for anyone who applies for a U.S. visa in most categories, including Australians. So that could be a work visa or an extended travel visa, for example, business visas. They've already had to do some of these things that are in this proposal.
Now, there has been concerns raised, Melissa, regarding these extra requirements are a real invasion of privacy. Do you agree with that?
Yes, of course. I always have. I always thought the social media questions are a huge invasion of privacy, especially if someone like me, I'm not on social media a lot for many, many years. I use it for family purposes. I don't want that information out to the government as really none of their business in terms of, families of my pictures of my family, for example, or other connections that I have with other groups, for example. So, as speaking as an American, I'm also an Aussie, but speaking as an American, of course, I find this a huge invasion of privacy. And also, if Americans had to do this to come to Australia, there'd be an outrage about Australia demanding people give up their social media information to the Australian government before coming here on a visit.
Okay, let's go through some of the changes because under current rules, travellers from visa-waived countries still need to provide contact details, but also their home address, phone number, email, and emergency contact. Now, under these new changes, applicants could be asked to supply all phone numbers they've used over the past 5 years and all email addresses from the past 10 years, including private information about relatives.
Yeah. So that is a security, what they say is a security precaution that's been on the visa application for a while. The connections to your social media, that question has been on the ESTA application as a test question since the Biden administration. No, actually, Trump 1.0. So I think that that's not something new. They're just going to make it mandatory rather than voluntary on the ESTA application. These other questions that they talk about family members and addresses, that's on a visa application. So those questions can come up in terms of security. There's just a lot more vetting when it's a visa. There's you get fingerprinted at the consulate. They run security checks through all the international databases, Interpol and all those databases. But in addition to it, you have to swear under oath in your visa application that you have provided all the information. So the ESTA form is different. They sound like they're going to rise the same level of scrutiny in terms of security when it comes to an ESTA application.
Now, Melissa, also regarding social media, you mentioned earlier about that. I've also read quotes saying that apparently your social media has to be put on public. And in regards to the long-term issues with social media, even if apparently you delete recent posts, that history can be accessed. How concerning is that?
Yeah, that's very concerning. Again, those issues have already been in place for certain visa applicants for 6 months. And we have to field a lot of questions about that over the past couple of months. And so I find it concerning. And this is my objection is, again, because of the privacy issues that come about, things that you've posted on social media. I've made my social media posts private for that reason. I don't want information about my family out there. I don't want information about where I live or anything like that. So I've never had my profiles be public. So I think that's a huge invasion, and to require people to have to go beyond that just to have permission to go to the United States is very concerning. So if you are not someone that wants to have that information out there, again, I don't want pictures of my child to be available. Of course not. I don't want that to be available to the AI bots that are going to come through. And remember, this is all going to be done by AI. So there's no person there scanning through and saying, oh, that's a picture of a child. I'm not going to grab that, right? Or that's a picture of their house. I'm not going to grab that. These are all done, it's all done by artificial intelligence. So in that sense, we see a lot of ESTA applications, for example, get rejected on not verified information, or we don't know the reason why it got rejected. And that's going to be the bigger problem, is that just like we used to see in the Trusted Traveler program and no-fly lists where people's names got confused with other people's names, that was way back before AI was involved. Those were humans making those mistakes, right? And there was a way to appeal those things. In terms of an ESTA application, which most Australians use to travel to the United States, and actually most travelers travel to the United States on ESTA from over 40 countries. Most of the travelers coming to the World Cup, coming to the Olympics, are going to travel on ESTA permission. And so you talk about privacy, that's my concern, is that, you don't have then control over how your data, how your information, how your pictures is going to be used. And then where does it go to? If it's being viewed, it's going to be pulled into that whole network. And so I think I would take a second thought about actually doing that and allowing the U.S. government especially to have access to that information.
Melissa, in regards to that, that's a great point, the fact that if it is AI, and we also know of massive data breaches here in Australia and right across the world where we're promised by big corporations all the adequate protections are in place, and we know that hackers very simply but very effectively then steal that information, and that private information is on the dark web. How much of a risk is this with even more private data that we may hand over?
Well, this is just a personal opinion. I'm not an expert in that area, but I think it's a huge problem. I wouldn't trust the U.S. government with your information that's out there right now. There doesn't seem to be any type of oversight committee about this, or the Department of Homeland Security is not ensuring that, we're going to protect your data. We don't have any of those protocols in the United States. And so they feel the Department of Homeland Security feels, and this administration feels, that if you want to go to the U.S., it's a privilege. And so if we're asking for information, you got to give it to us or you're not coming. So if you don't provide it, or you say you don't have any social media, you are going to get denied an ESTA or you're going to be denied a visa.
So if you do by chance get through all these proposed new regulations and you're able to travel to the US and you arrive in the US, what are your rights? And we've heard stories about this before with Australians. If they are detained at a local airport, their phones or their possessions allegedly confiscated, what rights do you have?
Well, the land of the free speech is not the land of the free speech because you're not technically in the United States. So this is what they use as the excuse of why they can search your devices. If you want to go to the U.S. and they ask to search your device, you have to say yes, or you're leaving the country. You're not going to be allowed in. Now, as a dual citizen myself, an Aussie and an American, I have more rights because as my U.S. citizenship, if I'm entering the United States and I have a device with me, they are required to get a search warrant. Now, they do have some caveats to that about being in that international space. So you're not quite in the U.S. You are in the U.S., but I do have some rights. It doesn't mean that they can't confiscate my phone and say, we'll give it back to you later, or we'll get a search warrant. And that's what I have to be very careful about because of my profession. So I am much more, I've been dealing with this for years. I think most attorneys have been dealing with this for years, knowing that that was happening. And so we have to take special precautions. Now, the average traveler, how that might be affected, again, you don't have any rights. You have zero rights. You have zero rights to talk to an attorney because it's a privilege to enter the United States. And in some ways, that's true for any country. It's a privilege to be able to have the right to come to Australia. But there is no chance that if you say, no, I don't want my device searched or don't take my device away from me, you're not getting into the U.S. on that visit.
The US government and administration claims that these new crackdowns or this new crackdown is basically to make the US more safe. What would you say to that argument?
My personal opinion, I think it actually doesn't make the United States necessarily safer. I think it just makes people more afraid. And listen, the average person, we don't have any issues. There usually are no issues. There's been no data that's been presented by the Department of Homeland Security that says, listen, because we have these crackdowns and we're doing more security checks, that the United States is safer. That there's no data that proves that. It's the same thing happened after 9/11. If we all recall what happened after 9/11 in terms of different security protocols and different things that were happening at the airports, I mean, did it make us any safer? Possibly. But in terms of the millions of visitors that enter the United States every year through the ESTA program or through the visa program that's conducted, those interviews are done by the State Department. And the State Department does an extremely excellent job at vetting people. When you go for a visa interview, you're fingerprinted. Your fingerprints are put through multiple international crime databases. Australia cooperates with the United States in that effort. And so, to say that this is another step that's going to make, people safer, I don't think that's true. I think it's more of an information grab. And again, my personal opinion, but it's all the signs point to they just want people's information. And how that's used in the future, I have no idea. But I don't think they're all for good. I don't think that it's something that we want to look at people's social media because, we want to be better partners with Australia. Can't see any argument for it, why it's important. And the level of security, does it really make us more secure? Because grandma gave up her social media information in order to take her grandchild to Disneyland? No.
And do you think this proposed crackdown, further measures, will actually have an effect, Melissa, of people visiting the States, especially Australians?
It already has. I mean, multiple people have told me, and our clients, I've had clients also cancel their visa applications. And we're talking companies that were ready to invest in the U.S. So companies that were ready, I have a perfect example. I had a company that was ready to open a warehouse in the U.S. They import clothing from Vietnam, not just an economic reason, but they just did not want the higher scrutiny and have to go through that whole process, and they pulled their visa applications. And I've had multiple situations over the past 6 months where, especially casual visitors, they're just not going right now. They're just saying, I'll wait. We'll wait it out a little bit because they don't want the higher scrutiny. And I don't blame them. I honestly don't. I don't think that you can criticize people who say, I just don't want to have to put my information out there and I'd rather not go. I think that that's a very rational way to deal with it. It's not fear mongering. there is a true threat to your information being misused, highly misused, and people don't want to put themselves in that position. I can totally relate to that. So I don't criticize people. And there's a huge drop in numbers of tourism going into the U.S. right now. It'll be interesting to see the trend if it continues next year for the World Cup, because sometimes people will put that aside because they want to go to a World Cup match or to the Olympics, right? So that'll be the real test. Like, does this really stymie people from wanting to go? I don't know yet. So, but I can tell you in the last 6 months, lots and lots of people anecdotally in our own practice, but also just what I'm hearing when people ask me that question, it's like, oh, I'm not going to go to Disneyland this year. I'm not going to take that cruise this year. I just don't want to have to tangle with the U.S. Totally understandable. I get it.
It's certainly very interesting conversation, interesting events. We really appreciate you joining us, Melissa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That was immigration lawyer Melissa Vincenty. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tonight with the briefing on Selena Gomez versus Hailey Bieber. And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.